You ready, Dan?
I'm ready.
We're doing this. All right, I'm here with Dan Slavin. Dan, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right, thanks, Cam. It's great to be here. I'm Dan. I founded Chainview Capital back in early 2018, so about 4 years ago. It's a cryptocurrency-focused hedge fund. We actively trade cryptocurrencies and try to kind of play this volatility. When you think of crypto, obviously you think of, tremendous price appreciation over the years, but you also think about the volatility that goes kind of both ways. And we try to take advantage of that. Yeah, we've been going for 4 years strong. It's been a wild ride as expected. And we're excited for what the future holds in our industry. And we've seen a lot over the years that I'm sure we'll get into today.
Awesome. Well, I want to start with your digital nomad journey a bit. Give me a broad overview of your story as a digital nomad and making money remotely and traveling. Like, how did you get started? Where have you lived? Give us the crash course here.
Yeah. So a lot of it kicked off with COVID, really. So when COVID hit, I was living in New York for a bit. And at that point, it was just, I always could work remotely, right? I just need an internet connection to do my job. I think when COVID hit, the stigma of kind of traveling and whatnot, went away. And I had been thinking about doing it prior to COVID. And I think COVID kind of kickstarted it. So once COVID hit, I left New York. I went to, a variety of different places. For me, it was moving to another place. To me, is not like you're picking up your whole life and moving. To me, it's just like you're going on a trip, and that trip might lead into a new life if you like it. But spending a few months here and there, I wouldn't call it a vacation, but it's a great way to experience another part of the world or country, it's almost like a no-brainer if you can do it. So for me, where I went, a lot of, in the winter places, I'd want to go somewhere warm because I'm from kind of the Northeast here in America. So I'd go.
As am I. The great escape. Once I got free, it's like, oh man, I can't do winters anymore. I can't do it.
Yeah, I'm not a skier or anything, so if I don't have to see snow, I'm happy. So that at a high level is kind of how things kicked off for me.
And what are some of the places you went to, and what did you learn about both picking places and what types of places you liked and didn't like?
Yeah, so I went to Scottsdale, Arizona. So New York, Scottsdale, Arizona, Puerto Rico, San Juan, Puerto Rico, then back to Boston, and then Miami. So you can imagine around what times I was in which places, based off the seasons. For me, I think one is, you don't, obviously having people in a place is helpful. I think it just makes kind of beginning of that kind of journey or trip a little easier, where you're not as lonely. So in Scottsdale, I had a few friends out there, whereas in San Juan, Puerto Rico, I really didn't know anyone. So that was a little easier in Scottsdale than let's say San Juan. I think the second part for me is I really like the freedom of having a car and being able to kind of move around. Even just going for a drive in the morning when I get my coffee is important to me. It helps me think, it helps me kick off the day, and it just lets me get outside of the four walls that's your house or your apartment. So for me, Scottsdale in that regard was fantastic, right? The Phoenix area is, a very, metropolitan area. It's a suburb within like a big city, and I could just kind of drive around, play golf, etc. Whereas San Juan, I was really packed in. It's really, trafficy to get out of the city, and it's just kind of tight. So for me, that's a big thing where it's kind of having freedom to kind of move around. And it's probably why I didn't like New York as much as I like some other cities.
You like the sprawl. You like, now you're in Miami, you got Miami's a big sprawl city. You like the sprawl.
So that's why, yeah, exactly. I like Miami because, you can definitely drive around. get out of the city easily. It doesn't take an hour to get out of the city, depending on what time. And so for me, that's actually been a kind of a learning lesson that I kind of was figuring out along the way. Another thing I think is just, I don't know how to really qualitatively describe this, but it's just the feel of the city. It's funny, I moved to San Francisco right out of college, and the moment I was in the taxi ride from the airport, and I hadn't really never been to San Francisco, I just moved there. And as soon as I saw the city, I was like, oh, I'm really gonna like it here, right? It was just some feel I got. Whereas like in New York City, it's like, oh my, I was kind of like overwhelmed. It's like, I don't know if I'm gonna like it. So I'm not sure what that is. It's funny, I like kind of know within the first 15 minutes of getting to a city based off the feel if I'm gonna kind of feel good about it. And I haven't really had it go against me, where it's like I had a good feeling initially and then it went against me. And I don't know how necessarily to describe it. But that has been, you kind of just, and that's kind of why it's fun to go to a lot of different places, because you don't know until you show up, in my opinion, if you're going to like it or not. And that's kind of an exciting.
I definitely agree with the sentiment of you don't know if you're going to like it. Which I think I've learned partially on my end is like for new places, especially outside of the US, like in new cultures, trying not to book too far, like try not to book too much until I'm already there. Like yeah. I think my one negative experience, I went to Budapest, Hungary, and we booked for 2 months, and we got there, and within 2 weeks, I was with a buddy. We're like, oh man, like this is not the spot. Like I'm not enjoying it here, but it's like, man, do I just burn the month and a half, or do I anyway? But I think, yeah, for new places, you figure it out pretty quickly, whether it's your spot or not.
Yeah. And it's so weird. Whatever it is, it can be small things. You just don't know. And for me, that's exciting to show up to a place not knowing. And I don't get too anxious or nervous about going to a new place, because it's just like, what is there to lose, right? Like, you're not, like, as long as it's safe where you're going to be, there's really not much to lose. A month or a few months, and then you can get out of there and know you never want to live there again.
I agree. Well, I want to shift to your transition from being a employee to being an entrepreneur. Tell me about that transition and how you identified an opportunity, how you made that leap. Like, tell me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah. So really, I knew back in college that I wanted to start a company someday. That was kind of my dream. And for me, it was always around tech. Like a lot of people, always think of like the next app idea, right? That was kind of a dream of mine. And I would always write it down like in my notepad on my phone. So for me, I actually ran a business in school. It was a bed rental company. And I really enjoyed that. So I knew kind of running a business was something, I definitely wanted to do. So instead of doing it right out of school, I worked as an employee at an early stage startup. I was one of the, first 10 or so employees at the company. And I just wanted to learn how to grow a business into, millions of customers, right, using the product. And for me, it was always that I wanted, what I learned as being an employee for, the 2 years I was there was just, I wanted to be the one to make the kind of big decisions in business, right? Business is all about decisions. So I wanted that on me instead of someone else. I also think from like a more philosophical point of view, working for someone else, your hard work, if it's really, to me, it goes against my ethos working for someone else. If you're going to put in all this work, right? If you're an athlete, imagine putting in all this work just to help someone else on the team do really well and not really.
I'm gonna shout out Sergio Perez helping Max Verstappen win the championship. It happens. The role players.
Yeah, the role players, but like the role players still get credit in businesses.
It's very true.
You don't really get credit. So it's, I guess when I said that, I kind of like, yeah, I mean, definitely a team sport, you want to help someone out. But like, I guess it's just like, you don't reap the benefits. Like you don't, if you were to keep that analogy to a sports team, if you win a ring, you get that ring forever. A lot of times in business, if you do really well and the business does really well, if you're just an employee, you don't get the ring. It just depends on what you're after. A lot of times it's really just kind of the founders, just a few people there who really get the ring, I would say. So for me, it was, okay, just like, what do I want to start, right? And when? Looking back, I think I could have done it right out of college. But it was definitely helpful to just be at an early stage startup and really see, it was a venture, a good venture-backed business. And, at the time, I moved out to San Francisco in 2015. Crypto was really still like a few people really knew about it. And by the end of 2017, it really became like a household kind of technology where people at least had heard the word Bitcoin, whereas like a year prior, they were, very few people had. And so seeing that growth while in San Francisco, where in San Francisco, it was actually well before that huge run up that, people were really getting, involved in the industry. And, I think geographically speaking, it was the best place for me to be in terms of getting exposure to this new up and coming asset class and technology. It was almost like, okay, I graduate college in 2015. 2 years later, crypto becomes, mainstream in a lot of ways, even though everyone thought it was a bubble. I was like, well, if you look in the history of time and just even the last few decades, where have people done really well? Oftentimes there's a similar theme, which is they got into an early industry. I think the two leading examples of that is Wall Street and the tech industry. And the household names in the business world are the ones who kind of did the best in those industries. But there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of people you don't know about that also did extremely well just by getting in and riding the wave of that new industry. So here it was like, 23-year-old kid being like, well, this is a great bet to make to get into this industry where I can become an expert in it very quickly because it's so new and do things that I probably wouldn't be able to do in other industries. And I, of course, really believed in the technology and understood it and was really excited about where it was going. So for me, looking at all the different ideas I had, right, I still had some tech ideas that I was considering as well. It was like, well, I think, crypto is the way to go. So that was really my decision just to do as opposed to whether or not to do it.
Well, I want to switch a little bit to a crash course on crypto and Bitcoin, and specifically thinking about people who are maybe crypto curious or dabbling, but aren't deeply savvy. Yeah, give us a basics kind of 101 as far as what should people be thinking about when it comes to Bitcoin and crypto. Why are you excited? Give a little rundown for us.
So I think the first thing to think about when it comes to crypto is think of this as just money to start. And the first thing I think about is if you live in the US, think of the dollar. Like, what is that, right? Like the dollar used to be backed by gold. We went away from that. So now we have a dollar that's backed by the US government, essentially. But like, what does that mean? So money all of a sudden becomes something that's easy to produce, right? Where you can just click a printing press to print more paper that has money that merchants, stores, consumers value. And there's nothing really behind it. And I think when you think about really what money is, you start to realize that over the history of time, right, it used to be seashells, right? It's been a variety of different things in this world that humans value. And I think when you think about that, it's like, well, no shit, there's going to be a new form of money in the future, right? In 500 years, I don't think we're going to have the dollar. The question is then, okay, well, why is Bitcoin maybe a better form of money than the dollar? So I think that is the first question you want to ask, which is just like, yeah, I've probably grown up in a world where the dollar has been extremely strong and I haven't questioned it. The dollar's money, that's what it is. But if you start to question it, I think that's when you start to see, okay, maybe there is something to this Bitcoin thing, right? There's a fixed amount of supply. No one can change that, right? There's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoins. Is that a good thing that someone aka there's no Federal Reserve who can, just walk into work one day and say, hey, I want to make 1 trillion more units of dollars exist in the world. Like, is that a good thing that a human doesn't have that power? And I think you start to realize that money is really all about trust. And over time, I think you lose trust when humans control it, right? I think a perfect example is with the COVID outbreak, the Federal Reserve printed a lot of money to try to, save the economy and keep people, healthy and surviving when they couldn't go to work, where they would give out stimulus checks, which short term, of course, I think that's, a good thing for our country and society to have given them this money. And as a human making that decision, I think humanity would tell you, of course, we should do that. When there are decisions like that aren't so black and white, where as we've gotten vaccines, et cetera, and we've continued to print more and more money, well, now it's like, well, is this the right decision? And in the future, there will be many more decisions where we're going to question whether or not the Fed is making the right decision. And when you look at Bitcoin's monetary policy and supply schedule, everything is backed by math. So you're not trusting any humans, you're just trusting that math is going to work. And that, if you think about it over decades of time, a lot of trust is going to build in that. And already you've seen the market value of Bitcoin reach $1 trillion. I think I don't think that this is objectively the fastest network effect and most powerful network effect in technology we've ever seen. Many people still think it's a bubble, it's a scam, whatever it might be. We've literally reached $1 trillion in value in a decade. So just imagine in another decade, 2 decades, et cetera. And again, money is entirely trust for the most part. So obviously, there's been a good deal of trust that's been built in Bitcoin that's just getting started. So I think that's the first thing to really think about is just go compare Bitcoin to the dollar and ask yourself what makes more sense. Then crypto has I kind of separate it as money versus kind of the internet, where people call it Web3, where it's basically decentralizing the whole internet. And this is where I think it gets a bit more complicated, even though it might make a little more sense, where it's like, well, imagine instead of Facebook owning, Mark Zuckerberg's owned, a large percentage of Facebook, Facebook makes money through ads, and users of Facebook, right, who actually use the platform are really not making any money. It's Facebook, the company, that makes the money. So now what a lot of crypto is doing is trying to align the incentives so the users make the money, because there isn't a company. And the way they do that is by creating these tokens and creating all these incentive structures to align that. So now you're seeing, decentralized Facebook, you're seeing decentralized Dropbox, where I think there's a really cool project where you can basically rent out computer storage capacity to the world and get paid, right? Where you might have, be only using half of your storage on your computer, you could go rent that out and get paid for it. So that's an interesting concept, right? Where Dropbox basically pays for servers for you to do this and gets paid, you pay them. Now you're basically your own Dropbox. And so you're seeing kind of this incentive structure start to align to empower the end user and monetize the end user, which I think is inevitable. And I'm not sure you necessarily need all these tokens to do that. I think you're already seeing that in the content world, where I know this is a crazy example, but like OnlyFans, right, is a prime example where they took they basically are allowing content creators and individuals to really monetize themselves. And I think it will spread into maybe more PG type stuff. And you're seeing that with like Patreon and stuff like that. So I think it was already happening. And crypto maybe takes it to another level if successful.
Interesting. And for the retail investor, the average Joe, you gave a great breakdown of kind of Web3 and that side of crypto and Bitcoin, how would you advise, or maybe advise isn't the right word because it sounds too formal, but how would you think about allocating or investing money into Bitcoin versus other coins? And yeah, for someone who's new to the game, I mean, what basic advice or thinking would you provide?
Yeah, I always think about risk reward. Like, the newer the project, the more risk it is, right? Inherently. So Bitcoin's the oldest product. So by that metric, it's the least risky cryptocurrency. In terms of, so weighting a portfolio would be just kind of what is your risk appetite, right? Obviously, crypto as a whole, including Bitcoin, is, very much risk on, right? The volatility is pretty extreme. And that's a lot of kind of quantitative way to, define and measure risk. So I think the first thing for me is always, well, what is leading this market? If you knew how the dot-com bubble would kind of play out and, Amazon still being around, if you could pick, the Amazon of crypto, you'd probably put the majority, your allocation into the Amazon, and then probably get a little more risk on with some other stuff. And that brings into time horizon, right? So we always talk about this in crypto. You probably hear it all the time, buy and hold. So you probably buy and hold Amazon, and then maybe have kind of more trades of other kind of stocks, right? So for
little Dogecoin, little
yeah. So the trade could be 3 years, it could be 3 days, it could be 3 hours, whatever you might do. So for me, I really see Bitcoin as the Amazon. And when you look at the quantitative metrics, everything is correlated to Bitcoin. You've probably noticed this, even if you've only been in crypto for a few months, right? Like, when Bitcoin moves up, everything else moves up with it. When Bitcoin moves down, everything else moves down with it. It's just higher in terms of the movement relative to Bitcoin. So you have this market leader, which is Bitcoin, that's established. To me, that's the buy and hold. That's where I like to put the majority of my portfolio in. And then you can trade, some other coins, where right now Ethereum is the second biggest coin. Well, is there going to be an Ethereum competitor that overtakes it? Maybe that's a 2-3 year trade for you, right? Where you evaluate the variety of different platforms that are trying to compete with Ethereum. And obviously, if they overtake it, assuming from a dollar perspective, the coin appreciates, that's a good trade. So I think, having a diversified portfolio makes sense, but I think you definitely want to weight a lot of it into Bitcoin.
And then for someone who wants to go deeper, who wants to immerse themselves in this world, communities, what resources, books, podcasts, what do you recommend?
Yeah, so I think crypto Twitter is very active. Yeah, it's a wild place, but it's very educational. So I would definitely get into crypto Twitter, and from there, that'll get you into a bunch of different podcasts, books, etc. CoinDesk is kind of a leading website for news in the crypto space. In terms of books, I think the Bitcoin Standard is a good book. So is Bitcoin Billionaires, about the Winklevoss twins. That's a fun read. I think if you start there, you'll start to really get it. I like a lot of articles, reading, those on, specifically like, what is Bitcoin? When I first started, I would send out this article that was like, explain Bitcoin to me like I'm 5 years old. And some people would get offended by that. But it's like, that article, you can go find it out there. It's great place to start in understanding Bitcoin, because so many people try to understand Bitcoin as if they're like technology experts. It would be like, explain to me email. Well, you can just send a message to anyone in the world. How does it work? Well, there's cryptography and all this stuff that's behind it. I have no idea how it works, right? Most people have no clue, but they know the end result and how to use it. And I think that's the same thing with Bitcoin. I can send money anywhere in the world. Well, how does it work? Well, it's a lot more complicated, but you know how to use it. I can tell you how to use it. It's very, straightforward, and you know the end result. So I think keeping it simple and understanding just kind of why it exists and how it largely works at a high level is a great place to start.
Well, I want to shift into talking about a specific digital nomad location, which we're going to go deep on Scottsdale. Before doing that, I want to ask you, what would 15-year-old you say about your life now?
That's a good question. I think he would say I need to exercise a little bit more.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, I was a big athlete growing up, so I don't think he would tell me to, run some laps a little bit more. And then I think, I'm very much into my work, so maybe getting out and doing a few more things would be what he would tell me.
Well, but no positive sentiment from 15-year-old Dan?
Well, he's very proud of me for sure.
Okay,
but
cool.
He's tough.
He's critical. He sounds like 15-year-old Dan sounds like a harsh critic over there.
Yeah, no, he is.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into Scottsdale, Arizona. So, give me your general thoughts, pros and cons for someone who's thinking about doing, let's say, a 1 to 6 months, maybe longer there, and is working online and think about hanging out there. What should they know? What did you dislike about it?
Yeah, pros definitely. It's a nice area, good weather year round. Obviously, the summers get really hot, so great place to be in the winter. I think if you're like me and you like to be able to be in kind of a metropolitan area, kind of a happening place, but at the same time have space, have a backyard, move around. It's also great. There's great golf, there's great hikes, there's great restaurants, nightlife, whatever you might be into. They have it there. For the most part, it's a really nice area, but it's also relatively cheap compared to similar cities or areas in the country. So I think that's definitely a plus. There's a lot of cities, Miami being one of them, where short-term leases really don't exist. So Scottsdale, if I'm remembering correctly, definitely had some short-term rentals available, which is also great. And I thought the people there were extremely, nice, kind. I think so. I highly recommend it. Probably for the winter months, maybe not the summer, because that can get really hot. In terms of cons, it's definitely closer to a suburb than a major city, in my opinion. So if you're looking for more of a city feel, Scottsdale probably isn't it. There are, centers of town and, business area in Phoenix, but it's definitely, feels more like a suburb than necessarily a city. I think there's a lot of chains in terms of restaurants. So if you're looking for more local kind of coffee shop feel, stuff like that, it's more kind of the kind of commercialized America when it comes to food. And it's dry heat, which, for me, my was I felt like I had a cold coming on for the first couple weeks because it's dry, and I had never experienced that really for a long period of time before. So definitely something to get used to. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's a great place. There's not many bad things to say about it. And, if you have the opportunity to be able to do it, I would definitely recommend it for the upcoming winters.
Right on. And then a little bit to go a little deeper on the cost of living side, you said it's cheaper than some other comparable places. So what would you compare it to in ballpark? I mean, how much cheaper do you think of it as being compared to other places? And then, give us a basic sense, I guess, of cost of food, maybe cost of drinks, some basic different cost of living metrics.
I mean, relative to a New York or a San Francisco, I mean, it's dramatically cheaper. I would say over 50%. I rented a house when I was there, and the house was a 3-bedroom house, and it was cheaper than a lot of 1-bedroom apartments in New York City. So you can really get a lot of space for very little. I would say probably drinks and food are probably pretty similar to a lot of major cities in terms of cost. So you're not necessarily going to save so much there. It's more, I would say, on the real estate side. Yeah. And I think that's kind of how I'd break it up. You'd save a lot on housing, which I think oftentimes is one of, if not the largest expense.
And how easy or hard did you find it to meet other people there?
Yeah, I think because it's more of a suburb, it is a little harder than maybe in a, more condensed city. At the same time, there is part of it too is like, because it's more of a suburb, there's really one kind of center in Scottsdale. So in a lot of ways, it's like everyone goes there if they're going to go out, get dinner, etc. So in that regard, it's almost easier to meet some people because everyone's kind of in the same area. As a whole, if you're going into kind of the center of town often, you're gonna meet a lot of people. But obviously, if you're staying around your house or apartment, it's less condensed. Going to this local grocery store or deli you might not run into very many people. That's how I'd describe it.
Got it. And then you're only there for a few months. I don't know how good of a pulse you have on this, but are there neighborhoods you'd recommend to live in, neighborhoods you might not recommend to live in? I mean, if it's suburbia, then it sounds like a lot of it might be, it's not like, at least how I'm imagining, there's not like dangerous areas to avoid. It's probably all sort of a matter of personal preference, but I could be wrong on this.
Yeah, I think like any city, there are some areas that are a little more run down than others. I think it's hard to go wrong in Scottsdale. If I'm remembering, Phoenix, you can get some tougher areas. So yeah, I would probably stick to Scottsdale if you can. Obviously, Phoenix is cheaper. I think for me, it was like I Google mapped it and, walked around on the street.
You're like Google Street View.
Yeah, you can get
That's a great, I will say that's a great, might be a great closing tip. I started doing that only recently, and it is a great way to get a pulse of your area. Like you can drive or walk around, they're the equivalent. You can see what's going on. Are there like cages on windows and stuff, or is it not? And you can pick up a lot of what's happening.
Exactly. We talked about that feel that I get. So that I've found helps.
Sweet. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Dan, I really appreciate your time. This has been very helpful and informative. For anyone who wants to follow you and your journey or wants to get in touch, what's the best way to follow you or to get in touch with you? You don't. This isn't pressure. You don't have to throw your email out there. But if you have any, any social media,
it's a TBD. I'll get back to you on my Twitter. I don't have really any public facing stuff quite yet.
Got it.
Maybe by the time this comes out.
Well, you can Google Dan Slavin. You can also Google Chainview Capital.
Yes.
And if you Google around, by the time this comes out, you might have some new places to follow and pay attention. And we'll probably have Dan back on the podcast. So if there's any updates on the social media side, you'll hear him here as well.
Yes. You'll be the first to know.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Well, Dan, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Cam.